Hello, everybody. Apologies for the lateness of the Paddock Pass podcast this week, but if you've been following our content on Patreon, then you'll know that we've been busy every day from the first to test of the season. Dave has already been flashing his hat at the MotoGP paddock in the confines of a surprisingly dry Sepang international circuit. We'll try not to trip over ourselves in terms of content and views from the Patreon posts, but the aim of the show today is to give you our 5 takes, hot or hysterical, that we gleaned from the 3-day session and the first flurry of action this year. I'm Adam Wheeler, and before I get onto my esteemed colleagues, a swift reminder about Renthal and why heading to renthal.com for any and all street bike accessories, chains, grips, bars, and loads more will be the best move you can make this winter. You can't beat quality. David Emmett, you're still in Malaysia.
I am.
Rumors of checks for depravity have come back negative. So hopefully you'll be at the airport and on your way home soon. Did all that new tech in the pit lane get your juices flowing?
It was. It was very interesting. But I shall be really pathetic and tell you the thing that surprised and shocked me most was when Harry Lloyd pointed out to me that there are different front paddock stands for bikes with front fork wings and bikes without front fork wings. So that's one of the ways you can tell, because they have to actually bend the things and make them sort of wider and stand out so that they don't interfere with the fork wing. So I was like, oh my goodness, that's very, very exciting. So that was and it also made me laugh.
That was the highlight of your test.
It wasn't the highlight. Actually, the highlight of my test was seeing Michele Piro's funky sort of Comstar wheels with all the secret tech hidden inside them that you can't find out about it. And yeah.
Well, hang on. Don't shoot your load just yet. We're going to get onto that in a minute. But it's good to know that there's different kind of front
paddock stands.
Bike stands.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that's the kind of useless information we like to give out on the Paddock Pass podcast. Neil, I know your juices are always on tap, but where can our listeners read some of your fine, superb, often late prose on the Sepang test?
It's a very timely pose, I would like to remind our users this week. But yeah, motorcycle news, cycle news, Australian motorcycle news. So I think the people I've been writing for this week. So yeah, if you're in UK, America, Australia, like I think most of our listeners are, then check out one of those publications.
Let's get right into the test then. Pecco Bagnaia, top of the charts, 4 riders into the unheard of 56 for lap times, and the top 10 all under the lap record. Dave, you kind of hinted a little bit there. What was the most impressive bit of hardware that got you all sweaty in Malaysia?
Well, the most impressive hardware is always on the test riders' bikes, because what the MotoGP riders, the factory riders, what they're testing is stuff that they might use in 2024. But just like Lorenzo Savadori at the Valencia test, trying Aprilia's carbon chassis, I saw one of Michele Piro's bikes with all sorts of. It had these funky wheels, which means there's all sorts of sensors all over the back of it, and of course also on the back of on the back of the Aprilia, we saw an aero rake, which is a little thing full of pitot tubes, which measure air pressure, and Aprilia using it to basically validate their models. First of all, they work out what they think the airflow over the bike and rider will look like, and then they send a rider out with one of these things on the tail and to measure all of the air pressures and see if it sort of actually matches what they do. But people got very, very excited about that. They've been using them in F1 for literally decades, so I was quite surprised that people were absolutely fainting. They were taking to their fainting couches over it. But yeah, like I say, like Michele Piro's bike, when he went out, there was all sorts of funky lasers and God knows what else on there, which means you know that they're trying to do something weird.
KTM also had one, but it looked more like a sort of rack for underwear, or drying underwear, I guess you could say. Who do you reckon made the biggest steps in terms of aero, Dave? I mean, you saw KTM have this quite impressive groove on the side of the fairing, Ducati coming up with some interesting stuff as well, but, everybody trying that kind of area of the bike for improvements.
I mean, it depends what you mean. I think that Honda probably made the biggest step forward, but they were coming from a much lower base. Ducati managed to. Well, last year Ducati had two fairings. One of them was if you like, the ground effect fairing, which is the one with the side sticking out, which you also saw on the Aprilia. And then the fairing for turning, which had the side pods at the top and these sort of little downwash ducts down the bottom front of the fairing. And Ducati came up with a fairing which combined the best of those, which all of the Ducati riders ended up liking by the final day. It did make the bike a little bit more difficult to turn, but it was much more stable in braking, made it much more stable, and made it, just improved it. So I think Ducati did a fantastic job. Aprilia, I think, have a whole bunch of stuff that they were testing, and I think they still have a way to go. What KTM were doing was very, very interesting. I haven't had a chance to proper sort of like look and figure out what they were doing. But yeah, it was also interesting seeing, for example, Aprilia debuted these fork wings, but on their new bike, these fork wings aren't there anymore because they're getting the same effect from somewhere else. So it's an ever-changing sort of picture of what's going on.
Well, as we said at the top of the show, we don't want to go sort of shackle into the test. So we've come up with 5 takes. Hot or hysterical, we have to sort of give them a verdict once we've discussed them. The first one I want to throw at you, Neil, perhaps you can go first on your opinion. Number 1, Marc Marquez might take longer to get the hang of this dominant Ducati thing than people might think. Thoughts?
Yeah, if you mean like longer as in a couple of races, then yes. But I think he's pretty much on schedule, judging by his performance at the test. The first day, there was maybe a little bit of worry. I think he was having some technical issues which were debilitating him and his machine for the best part of the morning and early afternoon. I think he had 4 exits, 4 technical issues that he had to come back to the box with, and really couldn't get himself sorted. We heard a couple of our photographer colleagues talking about watching Marc trackside at turn 15, turn 9, 2 of the heaviest braking points on the track, and him looking far from comfortable, far from his usual aggressive self breaking into the corner. But when you looked at his rhythm on day 2, it was actually quite strong. It was not that far away from his brother, who's obviously had a full year on that bike already and won the sprint race at Sepang last year. And then on the final day, he did manage to find some of that kind of one lap speed. So, 6th place overall. Okay, he's half a second off Bagnaia's fastest time, but I would say that's a really solid opening, considering he's having to unlearn around 11 years worth of experience on the Honda and approach a bike completely differently. He spoke at length quite a few times during the week about how you ride the Honda all on the front, whereas the Ducati needs to kind of be ridden on the rear. So you're talking about night and day differences here. Even for a rider of his standards, I never thought it was going to just click like that and he would be fastest at Sepang on day 3. But I think all things considered, he's probably where he wants to be. I didn't see his face yesterday, but I listened to for the final day of the test. But I listened to his debrief, and he certainly sounded very, very happy and very content. So, maybe he's not going to win in Qatar, but Austin is round 3, guys. So I wouldn't put it past him winning there.
Dave, this is one of the fantastic things about motorcycle racing, because you have arguably one of the best riders to have ever swung his leg over a Grand Prix motorcycle. You have the motorcycle that's won the World Championship, but still there's such a fundamental characteristic and difference in the way to ride the thing that, these two entities need to gel. They need time. And, people kind of speculating when Marcus had signed the contract to ride for Ducati and Gresini that the championship was already done. I mean, it's a little bit of common sense, but it's going to take time.
It is going to take a little bit of time, and especially like you say, you've got Marc Marquez, probably the most talented rider ever, and the Ducati, probably the fastest MotoGP bike ever. I think Peter Bond on Twitter, I just saw a tweet of his, and he was sort of like saying, like, Marc is getting off a motorbike. It was a MotoGP bike, or rather, it was a motorcycle. It was a racing motorcycle. It's getting onto the Ducati, which is the modern MotoGP bike. It's much more. It's a completely different animal. Marc is used to riding everything with the front. That was the way you would. bikes used to be short and high, and you would use the pitch of the bike to be able to turn, to be able to brake, to be able to accelerate. You'd use your body to manage the bike. Now bikes are long and low. You're using aerodynamics. You're exploiting the drive. You're exploiting acceleration. You're using the aerodynamics to help you stop the bike. You're using the engine brake. You're using the ride height device. It's a completely different ball game, and the Ducati is right near the peak of that. So yes, it is going to take more. Mark was looking much happier. Also, he said, sort of, by the end of it, like. In braking, if you look at braking, I'm actually better than a lot of the rest of the Ducati riders. So he has already adapted. But I think if you're talking about hot or hysterical, they were basically fans had either, fans and also, experts and ex-riders and people like us. There were two takes on Marc. He's going to win every race and be crowned champion by about round 6. And the other take was he's going to fail terribly. It'll be the end of his career, and he'll retire in tears. Of course, neither of those is really going to work. The reality is it's going to take him probably half a season. We were talking. Neil and I were at the Grassini launch, and we were talking to Frankie Carchetti, who's saying, "Look, it's going to take him a few races to get up to speed because he has to figure it out." Marc himself was saying the first, Sepang, you're here. You've got 3 days. And it took him 3 days to really figure it out, and he started to get up to speed. We'll go to Qatar. He'll have 2 days testing there to figure it out, and then he'll race at Qatar. It'll probably be very competitive at Qatar. But then he'll go to Portimao, and he's never been around. Well, I mean, he's been around on a Panigale, but that's completely different. He's never been around Portimao on a Ducati MotoGP bike. And there's just not enough time to actually get up to speed. So until he really, truly wraps his head around the bike, which is going to take 5, 6, 7, 8 races, then there's going to be races where he'll be good, and there'll be races where he struggles. And it's going to be much more about the tracks, the tracks where he's good and the tracks where he's bad. So, yeah, it's going to take him a while. I think the second half of the season, things are going to look very different.
I think also you have to factor in that he's coming up against 2 guys now that are absolutely in their prime, and judging by the times at this test, obviously the test was ridiculously fast. Those 4:56 lap times that you mentioned, it was only a couple of years ago that the idea of doing a 56 at Sepang seemed like a kind of ridiculous hypothetical thought, but now it was kind of commonplace if you were on the latest Ducati. This year Marc is going to be coming up against Bagnaia, who's a double world champion, Martin, who is obviously one of the fastest guys now in the world, and maybe Enea Bastianini, who's kind of rejuvenated. The jury's still out until we go to another couple of tracks, I think, just to measure Bastianini's progress. But certainly all the indications coming out of Sepang were very good. Davide Tardozzi was saying to, I think, Simon Crafar on one of the MotoGP Live interviews one day that the 22 Bastianini is back rather than the 23 one. And yeah, I think it's not like Marc is coming up against a kind of crap field where there's no one really staking their claim to be champion. This is a very competitive field with the GP24s now, even probably a decent step ahead of the GP23. So that's another thing that I think might influence the fact that he might not just show up and clean the floor with everyone in the first couple of races.
One quick thing about the 56s, it was notable there were 4 bikes which did a 156. 3 of them were GP24s, and one of them was Alex Marquez on last year's bike. So the track was really, really fast as well. It's not just that the Ducatis have made, or all of the bikes have made a big step forward. It's also the track and the riders, and everyone is just a little bit more used to it. It's not been so long since they raced there.
And 2 of those riders as well won the 2 races at Sepang last year. I mean, you had Alex Marquez winning the sprint, and then Enea Bastianini, that was his one major highlight of 2023. So, those riders obviously got a good feeling with the track. And Dave, like we said on the Patreon note show earlier in the week, certain areas of Sepang being resurfaced contributing to the excellent grip level. So the test, as always, it's so tempting to read stuff into it. But then, there are outlying factors. I mean, one of the things as well, as you pointed out, Neil, is, you do have 2 riders on the Ducati that are perfectly in sync now with the requirements of the motorcycle, that being Pecco Bagnaia and also Jorge Martin. And it's kind of unusual to go into the first test of a year with those two riders at the top of the timesheets and almost renewing battle lines from the previous season. That's something we're not quite used to, I'd say, in sort of preseason tests. But that leads us on to our second take. Pecco Bagnaia is going to be even better this year than he has been. A third title, I don't think, can be ruled out on the basis of these 3 days in Malaysia. But then again, so is Jorge Martin. So is that a hot take or is it hysterical?
I think it's exactly what you would expect.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't really argue with that point at all, to be honest. I mean, the guys ended up 1 and 2 on the timing screens at the end of the test. They were the fastest guys in the world last year. And there were 2 guys that Marc has consistently referenced when he's talking about learning the Ducati, because he said everyone can be fast on the Ducati for a couple of races, but the only guys that can do it every single weekend are Bagnaia and Martin, and that's the kind of level that he has to get to. I thought personally that Martin would maybe have a bit of a difficult time this year, living up to the hype of what he did last year. Bigger expectations on his shoulders. Now, last year there maybe weren't so many. It was more of a surprise that he was the kind of the championship forerunner. And then we saw him have a couple of crashes at the Valencia test last year, and I thought, I wonder if he's just maybe going to, a bit of pressure on his shoulders is really going to affect him. But yeah, everything that we saw from Martin over these 3 days was supremely impressive, just like it was from Bagnaia. And you can always tell with Pecco, just from the tone of his voice, like with a lot of riders, just how confident he is. And he was supremely confident on the final day of running. He said that basically the only small thing that went against him was there was an issue with his bike when he was doing the sprint simulation on the final day. He was, I think, maybe about 3 or 4 seconds off the fastest sprint simulation that we saw. And he said that was due to an issue on his bike. But otherwise, he was really, really pleased. He's not absolutely convinced about the new Ducati Aero. Like he definitely thinks it probably has bigger potential than what went before. But he's not like he absolutely loves it in the same way that Bastianini does, or even Martin came round to kind of thinking on the final day. But yeah, I mean, we're probably going to talk about KTM and Aprilia making big steps forward later in the show. They certainly have. But the thing is, it looks as though Ducati haven't stood still either. And, Bagnaia and Martin, they've shown that they're the best guys on the Ducatis, maybe with the exception of Marquez now. I think they showed once again that they're just going to take some beating because, rhythm-wise and just the sheer number of laps that they racked up in the 1 minute 58 when they were testing things was really impressive.
2 things coming to you first, Dave. Why is Bagnaia, given this impression that he's even more invincible? I mean, what have Ducati found? I mean, he had a lot of stability in braking. Braking is where he makes a lot of his gains around the racetrack. And, they've made an augmentation to his package for this season in the tests. I mean, it's got to the point where he was giving quotes on the final day that in Qatar, he only really needs to work on a few engine maps and he's ready to go. And also Jorge Martin, the situation with Ducati, because there was a lot of talk in Valencia last year that he was sort of done with the factory. He was not happy with the way he's been treated or the way he is treated currently. And there was some sort of dissatisfaction coming out of his camp. And then if you add on the slight kind of snub as well that he wasn't testing with the rest of the Ducati riders in the outing at Portimao recently, there's potential there for some sort of contract announcement, because you have to imagine that Martin is going to be top of the list for most manufacturers and teams in the silly season. If he leaves Pramac early on, does that derail a potential title bid? It seems like there's more turbulence around him than Bagnaia, who just seems even faster and even more invincible.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Bagnaia has completely cemented his position in the factory Ducati team. Secondly, winning one MotoGP championship is difficult. Winning a second one, defending a title, is 10 times as difficult because there's so much more pressure. I think he's grown enormously in confidence. Ducati have given him more horsepower. The engine is a little bit better. They still need to work on that first touch of the throttle on making it just a little bit less aggressive. But that's the sort of thing that you can work out with electronics. The bike probably suits his style a little bit more naturally because it's better. The first thing that everyone said when asked about, the engine's more powerful. How do you like it? There was, it's better in engine braking. That sort of gives you. That's really playing to Pecco's strengths. I think he's grown as a rider, as a person, as a champion. winning the second one has just given him even more confidence. He was walking around looking imperious, looking like, okay, I've got this. And riding, he just looked just wonderful, sweet, beautiful, totally in control. But so did Jorge Martin. And Jorge Martin, I think that turbulence around Jorge Martin, Jorge Martin is a little bit like Cal Crutchlow in that Cal Crutchlow was rubbish in a factory team. He should never have been in a factory team. He needed to be in a satellite team because he needed that underdog approach. What Cal needed was to feel that it wasn't fair, that everyone was against him, that someone else had an advantage, because then he would go, right, I'm going to show them exactly what I'm capable of, and I'm going to shove it down their throats. And Jorge Martin has that same chippiness, that same anger and arrogance. He feels if he's not getting the respect he deserves, then he is twice as fast, and he definitely feels like he isn't getting the anger, the respect he deserves. And that's making him faster. I think the worst thing that could happen to him is if he was in the factory Ducati team. There's going to be a lot of interest in him, but there was nothing said directly between Martin and Bagnaia, but there was a real atmosphere about it, because when you ever ask them Bagnaia about Jorge Martin and Airbus and anything, don't care about them, not listen to them, I only listen in what I'm doing, and Jorge Martin was the same. There's a real sense of the rivalry since last year has got even stronger, even more bitter, even more tense. It's never going to spill over into nastiness, but if they could, the first person that those two riders want to be are each other, first and foremost. The rest, we'll see after that. But there's some real tension there. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a great season, and I really think that the main two protagonists start right now after the Sepang test. The two favourites for the title are Jorge Martin and Paco Bagnaia.
Yeah, and you talked about some of that turbulence, Dave, surround our ad. You mentioned some of the turbulence surrounding Martin and where he might go in 2025. Would not be surprised to see him jump to a Japanese factory team, for example. Davide Todozzi said during the week that Bagnaia, they hope to have him signed up for 2025 and beyond before Qatar starts the first round of the season. So that kind of turbulence will not really be present for the number one. You imagine he'll be signed up and ready to go for 2 more terms with Ducati after this season, before this season even starts.
So Bagnaia is going to be better. Martin also, but then there's a little bit more of a bumpy road for Martin ahead. I'd say that's a pretty hot take and kind of common sense, I guess you could say. Number 3, Pedro Acosta finishes on the podium of a GP or a sprint in his first year.
That's a no-brainer. I mean, literally, it's a no-brainer. Of course he is. I think it's tough to win, but I think he can actually. I would not be surprised to see him win in one of the races in his first year, a place like Jerez maybe. Acosta is way ahead of where he was supposed to be. I spoke to Paul Trevathan, and he said, he didn't really make a plan for a rookie, because that's not the way that he works. He sort of tries to react on. To see how far the rider he's working is with, and then give him what he needs at that moment to make the next step. But yeah, you've got a list in your head of, all right, he's going to need to be able to do this and this and this and this. And he basically said, well, the first 5 scraps, the 5 steps, they were just straight out the window because he could already do it. Everyone was impressed by Acosta. And he's not going to be able to win the championship. He's not going to be able to do what Marc Marquez did in 2013 in terms of winning the championship and in terms of, regularly winning races, because the field is so much deeper than it was in 2013. There were 4 good bikes and Marc Marquez were getting onto one of them. Now there are, 12, 14 good bikes. I don't know. There's a lot of good bikes on the grid right now. And there's a lot of people you have to beat. But Acosta really showed the speed. He showed the pace. The most important thing is he did show the pace. I mean, Pecco Bagnaia was fastest on one day of the 2019 test in his rookie test, and I talked to Christian Gabarini about it back then. And Gabarini said, "Yeah, he's fast over one lap. That's the easy part. The hard part is being fast over the race distance." but Acosta's pace was really strong as well. He was capable of putting together a long run. He did a sprint simulation, which was pretty impressive. So for me, he's 100% going to. He's definitely going to be on the podium. I'd be surprised if he wasn't if he doesn't win a race.
Neil, it's tempting to get excited, but I know in the Pira Mobility Group and Gas, they're already trying to temper some of the hype around Pedro. But I mean, if we look at it analytically, then or if we analyze it with some sort of balance, then he rode for 6 days at Sepang. He was even talking about getting bored, as you would do. I think, the Red Bull Gas Tech 3 team manager, Nico Guillon, commented that he had done more than 1,500 kilometers around the circuit after the shakedown and, the IRTA test. So it makes sense that Acosta's going to be kind of up to speed, but still the rate that he's done it. And some of his comments are sort of exuberant, youthful, exciting, kind of throwaway, gloriously. I don't know, how else can you describe it? He is a little bit like a breath of fresh air, which I think is the phrase that Dave used during the Patreon shows. I think he lowered his lap times almost like half a second every day. I mean, he said he made a 3-second gain across that way. So I think there is some sort of justification behind this, right? Because the adaptation is real. He's making it look easy.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Ad. Obviously, it's in KTM's interests and in Acosta's interests to try and dampen these expectations that surrounded him. But I loved his kind of his answer to this the other day when he was asked, how do you feel? Does this add pressure on your shoulders now that you have to turn up in Qatar and perform? And he said, ever since I won my first race in Moto3, I've had pressure on my shoulders. So it's like pressure is only a word. I'm used to it. And you have to say it's true. Since Acosta did that Herculean first Grand Prix victory in Moto3 in 2021, the kind of the media spotlight was on him unlike I think any kind of teenager that we've really seen in Grand Prix racing, probably since Valentino Rossi. That kind of expectation from his home nation, from the media, looking at him and dissecting what's going on. So it is something that he's used to. And there were just so many things that were impressive. I mean, you mentioned a few of them, Ad, sort of Dave, the fact that every day he was just getting a little bit faster and sometimes not even a little bit. Like, I think there were some days where he was going faster by about half a second to his previous time. You listen to someone like Brad Binder, who was looking at his data and said, like, the way he brakes is just so impressive, so smooth, body position just right. And when you look at his sprint simulation on the final day, I think there were 6 other guys that were faster than him over 10 laps, but he was just, I think, 3.5 seconds off Fabio Di Gianantonio's sprint simulation time, which was the fastest of the lot. So 3.5 seconds after 7 days of running on the bike is not so bad. And as he was at pains to point out to us, this was only his 3rd ever trip to Malaysia to ride at Sepang, because obviously we didn't race there in 2021. So I think all things considered, it's pretty remarkable, this performance, and just serves to kind of heighten the hype and the excitement that is around him. That this is probably the most exciting rookie to come into the class since Marquez in 2013, and he has the kind of mental capacity, the intelligence to deal with it, to take it in his stride, and not be overcome by it. So, yeah, really fun times ahead, and I can see him getting on the podium. I'm not sure about winning a race this year, but certainly you can imagine him getting on a podium at some track that he loves, Saxon Ring, or somewhere where he's just always been really good at in the junior classes. So, as I said, exciting times ahead.
Dave, you have to have a degree of sympathy for Tectois because, in one hand, one of the narratives from 2023 was that you have to give riders time. The cases of Augusto Fernandez and also Digia, I mean, if you don't give a rider time to adjust to MotoGP and show what they can really do, then you're really doing them no justice at all, as well as those maybe decades and years of riding behind them to arrive to that point. I mean, you should be given more than 9 months or 1 season to be able to prove that you've got the chops to cut it in the Premier class. But now you have this sort of 19-year-old talent coming in and showing, well, actually, if you do have generational talent and you do have the right mentality and you do have this magic elixir for success, then it can work.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Ad. Anyone can win a MotoGP championship if you just happen to have the talent of Marc Marquez. That's the point about this is that he is a generational talent. He is exceptional. It's like talking to. I mean, like it's like talking to a 37-year-old, not a 19-year-old. He's so mature. He's so focused. He's so. He's also, very light and witty and all the rest of it. But yeah, it is. Yes, you have to give rookies a chance to develop. You really saw that with Digia. You could see that with the development that Augusto Fernandez made over the course of last year. But there are some people who are just genuinely so much more talented than others. In programming, we used to call them 10x, people who could write 10 times as much code as anyone else. And you couldn't pick...
Oh, God, you've lost everyone now, Dave.
You couldn't
We're trying to keep our listeners listening, Dave.
You couldn't pinpoint a reason why one person was so much better than another. And this is exactly the same. People like Marc Marquez, people like Valentino Rossi, people like, it looks like, Pedro Acosta are so much better than the rest. They are so natural at riding that they don't need the time. They can perform, but you can't expect that of a normal rookie.
So a hot take was just a slither of hysterical kind of nature, I guess you could say. Hysteria.
Let me put it this way. I think it's perfectly reasonable to be hysterical about this because I'm completely hysterical about it and very excited. That doesn't mean it's not real.
FlyRacing.com has an enormous amount of clothing and protective gear, both for the street as well as off-road riding. The Formula S helmet is the most comfortable, best ventilated, one of the best looking, and certainly the smartest motocross lid on the market. Fly have moved the needle by making connectivity and advanced helmet technology the new benchmark. Have a look at FlyRacing.com to find out how and why before you make your next helmet purchase. Okay, our fourth take from the Sepang test. The Japanese are still screwed. Discuss. For you first, Dave, because you mentioned, Honda at the top of the show.
It depends on how you look at it. If you look at it in isolation, both Yamaha and Honda have made massive step forward. I mean, like really big step forwards. They've really improved. The Yamaha now has a powerful engine. It is now fast. Top speeds are a little bit deceptive because the speed trap is just a fraction into the braking zone. And one of the reasons that Fabio Quartararo was so often so far up there is because he brakes that much later than other people, so he's not scrubbing off as much speed. But the Yamaha, he himself said the engine is much more powerful, there's much more speed. He said he felt like this is a bike that he can fight with. He still has a lot of work to do. The bike is still aggressive. They can't do a qualifying lap on it. The bike just won't do a qualifying lap. It can't get the best out of a new tire. So it's still flawed. Honda, on the other hand, the new bike is so much better than the old bike. It's unbelievable. Taka Nakagami was interesting. He said the biggest problem that the new Honda has is that it isn't as good as, or it still has the same problem of the old bike, which was rear grip. It's not worse, but it's about the same, or maybe a little bit better. But it's so much more better everywhere else. The trouble for the Japanese manufacturers is that Ducati have made another step, Aprilia have made another step. Looks like KTM have made a big step. So, like maybe Yamaha and Honda have made 4 or 5 steps forward. The trouble is that Ducati have made 2 steps. KTM have made 3 steps. Catching up is a lengthy process. They're not going to be competitive in 2024, but all of the riders seemed to be quite optimistic, much more optimistic than they were at the end of last year. Maybe that'll have changed by the end of this year, but we'll see.
Joan Mir was the last rider, I think, underneath the existing lap record. So that's, positive signs of progress for him. Taka Nakagami, I think, was 13th fastest. Of course, Johan Zarco and Luca Marini, you have to almost give a pass because they're still in that transition phase from Italian to Japanese machinery. Neil, what was kind of your thoughts just on the overall debriefs that we heard and what you saw in Malaysia?
Yeah, there's still, they're not going to be pulling up any trees, I don't think, in the first couple of races for sure. But if you gauge their progress from where they were this time a year ago, then, it's definitely a big step forward. for the reasons that Dave mentioned. And I think another thing that stood out was just that both factories finally seem to have realized that they really, really need to kind of turn around their working method and some of their strategies within the box. And there was some evidence of the kind of the Japanese riders, or the Japanese factory riders, explaining situations where there was a bit of a change. I think Yamaha have obviously made a big deal of Max Bartolini coming across as their new technical director from Ducati. I think he's the first ever European to hold that title within the factory Yamaha box. And some people at Ducati have told me that it was a massive shock that he left, and is going to be a big, big loss because he just had such a massive, massive area of expertise on pretty much every area of the motorbike. And I think there was a moment during the first day where they were trying a part on the M1. It wasn't working. They were getting quite frustrated. And basically Bartolini said, right, there's got to be a way to do this. And he insisted on trying a couple of things that were maybe a little bit outside the box. And Quartararo said in the past, Yamaha engineers would have discarded the part and said, okay, that's no good. But this guy was like convinced that there must be some potential there, and was willing to do something that was maybe a little bit risky and maybe a little bit outside what they were used to doing. So he was delighted about that. And Alex Rins was obviously saying he's not in a great position to judge, but speaking to Fabio has said there's a big, big step forward in how Yamaha are approaching things and how they're kind of organizing themselves. So that's definitely positive, and that will stand them in good stead. Then also said, I think I read a tweet from our colleague Akira Nishimura, who was speaking to Taka Nakagami. Taka was saying how on certain days Honda engineers were sitting around with all four Honda riders together in one kind of meeting, and they were all basically sharing information, discussing things, and that was the first time that he'd ever seen that. And that's a positive thing as well, because obviously Honda had been a bit of a closed shop when it came to the LCR squad, not always taking the comments of Alex Rins on board last year and his predecessors before him in LCR. So there is this kind of evidence that they are basically starting to understand that it's not just mechanically they need to improve it, it's kind of their approach, and I think that's a positive thing for them.
Yeah, just one note about Johan Zarco and Luca Marini. We talked earlier about Marc Marquez, obviously, and about that being the biggest step from Honda to Ducati, but it's an even bigger step the other way around as well, because at least the Ducati is a fast bike. At least it's competitive. Both Zarco has experience on the Honda at least, so he understands how it is. But Marini is having to get used to the fact that like the front is fine, but the rear has no grip, and trying to figure out how to manage.
So a degree of hysteria then on that take. The Japanese firmly sort of on the route, you would say, to some progression and hopefully some more podium presence in 2024. At this point, we want to play our interview with Massimo Meregalli, Monster Energy Yamaha MotoGP team director. One reason we put this in, because the audio is not fantastic, a little warning, is the quite wonderful backdrop of a typical Sepang storm. You picked your timing quite well for that one, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually the timing. The Yamaha were actually quite pleased with the timing because they just finished their presentation when all of a sudden, the rain absolutely fell down. So it was very loud, and there were some extremely loud bangs, and we were trying to figure out whether that was lightning or backfires from some of the bikes in pit lane. So apologies for that.
Or maybe a Japanese mechanic just getting frustrated and bashing the shit out of an RCV. We'll have to, who knows? But here's the interview anyway.
Maio Meregalli, you've already had 2 days of testing, which has got to be a big help because you have sort of a lot of work to do. First of all, how did the shakedown test go, and how much do you think it helps?
Yeah, at the beginning when I start hearing about the concession as proudness, I was not happy, but I have to admit that anyway this concession will help us to speed up the development, and we did okay, let's say 3 days with Carl and 2 with the factory, the official riders, because last year we brought a lot of material, but we could not probably test everything before the end of the year. And here we already started to evaluate items. The feedback has been good. mainly from the engine, from the aerodynamics. We bought also a new rear arc device that need time to be adjusted. And we have other things to do. And during the first 2 days, basically we had to stop because of the heavy rain in the afternoon. So luckily we have these 3 additional tests from tomorrow. Are important. We are sure that basically we have to take the most of them and not only go in laps and kilometers, but evaluate parts. So during the season, it won't be easy to find additional available days to do tests, but already we plan some tests during the season to try to prepare the race, but also to evaluate new components. And until we have this concession, we really need to exploit them as much as we can.
Yeah. Will you be planning your tests so that Alex and Fabio will be with Cal, or will you be using Cal separately and the riders?
No, same. It can be a few occasions that Cal will be alone, a few occasions we will be all together, and one occasion maybe only the official rider will be there in Europe and Cal in Japan. Mm-hmm. The limit is the quantity of the tires, but already in these 2 days we saved some tires because of the rain. And we will try to manage. After Le Mans we will go to Mugello, maintain the concession. After Austria we will go to Misano. Some idea. After Portimao the plan was to stay 1 day, but now Argentina has been cancelled. We are now considering to move to Jerez. And we will try to speed up, because I am quite sure that after the next 3 IRTA tests, plus the 2 in Qatar, most likely we won't be able to put everything together. So more days we will have, better will be.
Yeah. Because it's all very well having free testing, but with 22 races, I mean now 21, so there's a little bit, but 22 races, there's not a lot of time.
At the beginning, when we start thinking about tests, we were also concerned about the rider, because anyway we can't squeeze them too much. Even though when we spoke with them, every time you mention development, they always say, yeah, we don't care, we will do. But 22 races and let's say some official tests plus private tests, for sure this coming season is going to be very tough. But we are here to try to win, and we will do whatever we can to be there again as soon as possible.
The biggest weakness, it seemed to me, last year was of the Yamaha was acceleration. You seem to be losing a lot out of corners. There's a lot of reasons for that. New ride-eye device, that has got to be aimed at helping that. What do you think that you've solved, or you've helped your biggest problem a little bit?
Yeah, we already saw that we improve. We solve no, but we improve this problem. But to improve the acceleration is not matter only of one thing. Because it's a correlation, aerodynamics, electronics, engine power. So you have to be able to really match all these things together. And already, as I said, in these 2 days, we gain something. It won't be enough, for sure, but the direction has been taken. Another additional force is Max Bartolini, because he's bringing a lot of experience, but also the way he does is really motivating everybody. In a part of knowing a lot of things, but as a person, as a technician, he's really good to share the job and motivating the people. And this is, for me, something that we were missing, for sure, and also is really nice to see.
Yeah, exactly, because the personnel part is important. Finally, the times at the shakedown tests were insanely fast, just so fast. what has changed? Do you have any? Have you looked at the data? Do you know why the tracks have been so fast?
Yeah, for sure. Since the beginning, the track was fast, and because already in day one, they were able to be quick, and day two, after 3 laps, Fabio was faster than the race pace.
Yeah.
And he rode the bike last year in Valencia. He never touched a road bike, and it really impressed me. But for sure the condition of the track were very good, because the first laps we did with last year bike. So it's not because we improved the bike. We started as a reference bike with the same bike we raced here last year.
Okay, thank you. Well, good luck this year.
Thank you.
Well done, Dave, there for getting that interview with the Yamaha team director. Okay, on to our last take from the Sepang test. Number 5, KTM are more likely to push Ducati for the title than Aprilia. Who wants to have a first opinion on this one?
I guess I'll go on this one, and I will say that I think you're right with that assessment there. I do see both factories that were Ducati's closest challengers last year making steps forward. Aleix Espargaro I thought was quite impressive during the test. It was 5th fastest. I thought Brad Binder was quite impressive as well in 7th. 2 places ahead of Pedro Acosta. But I think that, it looks as though both factories were starting from a decent base. I think the 24 RSGP is not massively different from the 23, but the aero updates that they have brought are quite significantly different, and have required the guys to make some adjustments with their riding style. And it also seems that KTM were, starting from a decent base. They were actually pretty close to Ducati at the tail end of last year. And therefore, it wasn't like they were having to make like some kind of revolution. So I think the fact that Binder was 7th at a track and at a test that normally isn't great for KTM. I think he's called the Sepang test horrendous in years gone by. This was definitely far from horrendous. And listening to what Brad was saying on the final day, he sounded like, not like the bike is the absolute finished article, but they're very much in the ballpark. They made some changes, I think, on the final day. They've got a couple of different aero configurations to test, which they've kind of narrowed down, and they're happy with the kind of the new engine that they've got. And it seems to be a fairly sorted package. So Brad was saying, compared to this time a year ago, KTM are really quite far ahead of where they were. Whereas with Aprilia, they've definitely made steps forward. Aleix was saying that, his lap time and his kind of lap by lap pace was way faster. His race simulation on the final day was very, very strong, but you had to compare his kind of performance to that of Maverick Vinales, who was 12th, and Miguel Oliveira, who was done in 18th. And it seems as though the kind of that both of those guys are less happy with the 24 machine. They think it's got a lot of potential, but they still haven't managed to absolutely get their kind of combinations right. So I think both factories made a step forward, but KTM more so. And I think just the fact of the matter is that KTM have the rider lineup that I think would instill a bit more confidence in you.
Is it more confusing also, Dave, that there's such a mixed bag, with KTM and Aprilia? I mean, you have riders excelling and looking in a good position, such as Aleix Espargaro and Brad Binder, but then other riders struggling, such as Augusto Fernandez, Maverick Vinales as well, also indicating in his final debrief in Sepang that there's still a lot of work to be done in the Qatar test. And from those 2 days at Losail, you'd assume that they would have to be making final choices on the first and then looking towards the Grand Prix setup for the second. There's not a great deal of time left. And of course, Miguel Oliveira having to sort of get his head around the 24 motorcycle, like Neil was alluding to, and then Raul Fernandez not present at the test at all. So it's there are good signs and bad signs. It's not like there's an emphatic step forward for either brand.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is down to aerodynamics, in the sense that aerodynamics adds a complete another layer of setup. But one of the things that's one of the riders, I forget to, maybe Aleix Espargaro said early on during the test, was like, in the old days, you would have, you'd come somewhere, you'd have maybe 2 or 3 swing arms to test. You might have 2 frames to test, and you could run through the various combinations quite quickly. Now, before you even get to testing swing arms and frames, you've first got to figure out all of the configurations of the aerodynamics, and you've got the front wings, and you've got the fork wings, and you've got the side pods, and then you've got the various lower fairings. It might be ducts, whatever. Then you've got the various combinations on the rear. You've got the various tail wings. Massimo, Romano Albociano said, we've probably got 20 different combinations of various parts making up the aero package, and you've got to figure out which one works best. Literally, I mean, if you've got 20 different configurations, what you really want to do is do 20 runs in exactly the same conditions. But you can't do that because, to get a decent run, you need like 3 or 4 laps maybe to complete to properly understand it. And then by the time you get to the 20th run on the different configuration, you've forgotten what the first one felt like. And then once you finish that, you've got to move on to the next day. You've got to do that with all the rest of it. Find a working setup and then start testing all the other parts. And the other parts will also start influencing how the aerodynamics work. So it just gets really, really complicated. I think Aprilia have made things more complicated for themselves with the just massive amount of combinations. KTM seems to have simplified that process a little bit, and I think the base of the bike is better for KTM as well. That seems to be the thing for me. So I think KTM are in a better shape.
Neil Davis mentioned coding and he's gone deep into aero. So my kind of mouse pointer is hanging over the cutoff button, but we'll give him as a little suspension of his punishment just yet. But I mean, you talked about the rider line up there and just sort of this last point on KTM. Do you reckon that could be the sort of difference? I mean, you would probably put your eggs more on Brad Binder to challenge the Ducatis than you would say Maverick Vinales or Aleix Espargaro just because of a consistency thing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Big year for Binder, obviously, needs to step up, needs to prove that he can actually fight for the championship this year. And you could argue that in the past he didn't have the tools to do that. It does seem that they're going to be closer again. Just how close remains to be seen. So, yeah, I think most people would probably put Brad ahead of Aleix Espargaro in terms of who's going to finish higher in the championship. And then you have a certain hotshot rookie that could also come and influence things as well to a certain degree. So, yeah, I think things are looking very good for KTM.
An opportune moment to remind you that 2024 is the 30th anniversary of the KTM Duke Naked Bike range. There is currently an expansive media launch happening in southern Spain, and where KTM have added the robust 1390 Super Duke R to the lineup. Fantastic and fun motorcycles, very versatile and a blast to ride, and I can speak from personal experience. Head to ktm.com for more info. We're coming to the end of the podcast, Dave, but first of all, there were a couple of other small news snippets coming out of Malaysia. Perhaps most notably, Davide Brivio returning to the paddock as the team director of Trackhouse. That's quite a powerful name with a lot of contacts and a lot of experience entering the newest team on the grid.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a long history at Yamaha and then taking Suzuki, building Suzuki up from scratch and turning it into, a team capable of winning a world championship and winning races on an absolute shoestring budget. So, yeah, Davide Brivio knows how to run a team. They've split the roles. I mean, the roles were always split between team principal and team manager. Wilco Zeelenberg will stay as team manager. He'll be running, the day-to-day side of things. Where Davide Brivio will be doing a sort of a broader range of jobs. He'll be doing sort of a little bit more of the commercial aspects, a little bit more of sort of planning for the future, that sort of thing. It was a bit of a bombshell. Nobody really expected it, but everyone, including everyone in the team, was really positive about it.
It'd be interesting to see what kind of experience or insight he brings from the Formula One paddock as well. I mean, this is not the first time somebody's moved or transferred across the sports, but then you'd imagine that Brivio, after all of his years in MotoGP and then his 3-year term, I think, in working with Alpine F1, what kind of opinions is he going to bring to maybe change things a little bit for a team that are looking to shake things up anyway? Neil, Franco Morbidelli didn't run any laps at all in Sepang, suffering what would seem to be quite a heavy concussion after his crash at Portimao. The fact that Franco's not really going to get any testing time at all before we get to Qatar for the first Grand Prix, and it's not even really confirmed if he's going to be racing then. I mean, we're still like over a month, just under a month away from the first Grand Prix. So you assume he'll be in full health and ready to go. But his chances of really sort of making any dent on the grid with the Decimus Adichie are going to be limited, aren't they? Just because of his lack of time.
Yeah, it's a massive blow for Franco to miss the 2 tests in Sepang in Qatar. He did a lot of laps in Valencia back in November, but I think he was down in about 16th place. So it wasn't as if he jumped on the bike and was really fast straight away. We know how pressurized race weekends are. The need to put in a fast lap is pretty much there from Friday afternoon. So getting up to speed slowly is not really an option during a race weekend. So yeah, it is going to set Franco back a couple of races, I would say. The good thing though is that if we haven't been told exactly why he's missing, but the fact that he was knocked out unconscious and had to kind of be put on his side by the Marquez brothers, who are also riding at the same track day as him. We can assume that, he obviously has a bit of a concussion. The fact that he's missing these 2 tests it's a good sign that he's taking it seriously and he's taking the necessary precautions, which we don't always see in MotoGP. So, but I think this definitely sets him back a couple of races at least.
And then lastly, Dave, it's a bit of a difficult question for you, but we've seen the announcement in Formula One of Lewis Hamilton changing to Ferrari for 2025, even before a wheel's turned for the cars. I know you've got zero interest in it, so I'm not going to go on any more about it. But it's it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we see a high-profile MotoGP rider confirm a contract or a switch quite early into this season. But then there's another factor as well, and that's satellite teams, who could potentially change brand. I mean, there's already some talk going around about it. If you had to put your chip somewhere on a team maybe changing the manufacturer for 2025, who would you think is most likely to go?
I mean, the biggest no-brainer is for VR46 to become a Yamaha satellite squad. That was always the plan. There were factors which stopped it. I think they would already be a Yamaha satellite squad if it wasn't for Razlan Rosali and the Petronas Yamaha team, who took over from Tech 3. But in the meantime, Yamaha's lost a lot of competitiveness. So do VR46 want to drop what is clearly the most competitive package on the grid to join the Yamaha family? I mean, VR46 is a Yamaha ambassador. They all have Yamaha. I think most of them have Yamaha bikes for the at the ranch. Yamaha used to, when they only had a Moto2 team, Yamaha used to supply bikes for the VR46 Riders Academy to be riding around Misano to be training on. That changed obviously when everyone got to MotoGP and started riding Ducatis. So yeah, that seems like a no-brainer. However, there are certainly a number of factions. Tech 3 are not going to leave KTM. It's not going to happen because it's too close together. Pramac have always been the Ducati junior team. Yes, there's been sort of friction between Pramac and between Ducati, but Ducati use Pramac in such an incredibly strong way. Gresini are the team with the loosest ties to everyone. But at the moment they're a bit in limbo anyway because they've got Marc Marquez. What's Marc going to do? I think we don't know what Gresini will do until we know what Marc is going to be doing for next year. The thing is, all of these decisions have to be made by. Well, the summer break will already be a little bit too late. Really, these decisions need to be made by the end of June, by Assen, preferably by the start of June by Mugello. And I'm not sure that anyone's going to be ready to start changing teams just then. I mean, we do know that KTM have strong interest in LCR, but the way that Honda are now, I mean, like last year, you could easily see LCR saying, sod this, let's go and get some KTMs and get supported by KTMs. But the way that Honda have brought LCR in and are starting to use them as a satellite, as a junior squad, the way that Ducati have always used Pramac, I think things might be changing in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to say that Yamaha, particularly, not only have to show their staff and factory riders this year that they're full of intent. I mean, wrapping up Fabio Quartararo for the next couple of years is going to be a priority, but they also have to show the sport and the rest of the paddock that they're serious about developing the M1, especially if they want to entice a satellite team again for the future. So, window dressing perhaps was a big factor of the Sepang test. I don't think you can really understate how much Yamaha's intentions have to be made clear to guarantee a bit more of a stronger future in MotoGP. On to our winners and losers from the Sepang test. I'm going to go first. My winner was the world champion, from reasons we've mentioned on this podcast. I think Bagnaia is just looking in fantastic form. I'll also give a nod to Michelin because I think, those lap times on a reduced tyre allocation, I think the riders were also trying the new front tyre for 25. And there seemed to be, I wouldn't say thumbs up, but certainly some cautious optimism for a better state of that particular tyre. So Michelin does seem to get eternally bashed in MotoGP, so I'm going to give them a little bit of a few props anyway. And my loser, I just have to say Marco Bezzecchi. At the moment, he seems to be a little bit in a Jorge Martin 2022 funk in that he's not really gelling with the GP23 and the different engine characteristics. He said he's struggling both in corner entry and exit, and then in Bezzecchi's typically droll, dry sense of humor way said, on a motorcycle, you need to be able to enter and exit the corner. And it seems that he's going to be another one really fighting against the clock when we get to the Qatar test to get things sorted. So, Neil, over to you.
I think my winner, I think Ducati has to be, the big winner because they just look as though they are still imperious in MotoGP, and it's going to really take something special to knock them off their perch. But I think in particular, I'm going to have to go with Marc Marquez, just because I think what happened in Sepang was pretty much exactly what he could have hoped for, maybe the best that he could have hoped for. And the fact that he came away on the final day not just pretty fast over a kind of a set number of laps, but also had kind of tidied up his time attack pace. I think that bodes very well for his challenge this year. And my loser, I mean, there's a couple. Obviously, Frankie for missing the test. That's a massive loss for him. I'm going to have to go with Augusto Fernandez though, because he just really cut a pretty despondent figure throughout the 3 days. A little bit of an improvement, I think, on on Thursday, the final day, but I mean, he was just completely in the shade to his younger teammate who has come in and taken all of the limelight off him. And I don't know whether it's the pressure of Acosta that is in some way affecting Fernandez, but considering all the other three KTM guys were very positive about what the factory had brought to Sepang and what they were testing and what their bike is going to be like this year. Augusto was very much the odd man out, being taking time to kind of adapt and trying to find his way. And I think, Dave, you said yesterday on the Note Show that you watched trackside for a couple of laps, and Augusto just looked miles off it in terms of his posture. He just looked really rigid and stiff. I think you put it to him in his debrief as well. He said he just lost all his confidence in the first 2 days. So, yeah, he's already facing an uphill task, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, my winner has to be KTM because if you remember last year, there was all of that to do about, how did KTM fit 5 riders into 4 places? How did they find a place for Acosta? Are they making a mistake dropping Pol Espargaro for Pedro Acosta? Should he go into the factory team? All the rest of it. And they've played a blinder. Now, I will freely admit that I'm not quite the driver of the Acosta hype train, but I'm certainly heavily involved in making it go forward. But I had a quick little chat to Pol while I was there, and he was much more relaxed. He was enjoying being the test rider. He says, just like now that he's stopped, he's like, okay, no, the stress of those weekends were just terrible. Just really difficult because you make one mistake early in the season and then you're always playing catch up and you've got no time to rest, especially now with the sprint races. So I think it's quite clear that Acosta is the talent that we thought he was, and the whole situation has worked out for the best, except perhaps for Neil's pick, Augusto Fernandez, who all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure on him. So we'll have to see about that. The loser for me is the other Fernandez, Raul, who got, how many laps was it, Neil? Something like 10 laps into the test before deciding to see what the air was like up at 12,000 feet. Pushing too hard, too early. He knows that the pressure is on him. He knows that there's going to be pressure on him. I spoke to someone close to the team, and their view was that it was good for him to have done that, because he was just being stupid. He was pushing too hard when there was no need to. A test is 3 days. He's lost the test completely. Now he has to go back there. He has to calm down. He has to change his attitude. And this was the worst possible start to the 2023 season for Raul Fernandez.
2024.
Oh, 2024. I don't know. Look, I'm old.
We're in February, mate, all right?
Okay.
You've had a month of doing this, and I haven't said anything, but now I'm going to pick you up on it.
It was all fields round here when before, it really was. No, I can't keep pace with it. Anyway, I'm too excited about the fact that I've got a new laptop and it's waiting for me at home, and I'm going to get to build it myself and be just horribly geeky.
Dave, Raul Fernandez is the hubris of youth.
Yes,
that's what it is. Guys, as you may have seen on Patreon, we have a great competition of 2 paddock passes for a Grand Prix of your choice for people who sign up to the $10 tier for the year. The offer comes with a 10% discount on the total fee, and you get all that lovely content, our paddock note shows from each day of a Grand Prix, plus the chance to win those passes with only a few hundred other subscribers in the running. We'll pick the winner across the Qatar GP, and we'll announce the name of the lucky listener, through our respective channels. The Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League will also be starting up in a couple of weeks. Alpine Stars are sending our 2022 and 2023 winners some goodies, so a big thanks to Chris Hillard and the whole crew in Asolo. We'll be talking more detail soon on the 24 competition, so come and prove how useless we are when it comes to bench racing. Guys, any 100% solid...
Speak for yourself, man, all right? Speak for yourself.
No, I was speaking for Dave, actually, but,
I'm taking it seriously this year.
Well, listen, are there any 100% solid picks for you so far, regardless of price? I mean, is there one guy that you have to have in the team? Because last year, I think none of us really would have put Martin in from the beginning, but he obviously probably garnered the most amount of points.
Yeah, I mean, Pecco, I think is just an absolute shoe-in at this moment. You would say it has to go in no matter what that means for your other picks, because, yeah, he's Mr. Dependable. But, yeah, so far, maybe a bit too early to say on the other ones, though.
Does that mean you're going to be champion Taka Nakagami for the rest of the season as well, Neil?
Yes, Pecco with the 2 Fernandezes also in my team.
Yeah, but if you're looking for value, then I have to say, like Fabio Di Giannantonio has been outstanding all this test, and he really seems to have turned the corner, and he's really, really happy with his position within the team. So I suspect that he's going to be underpriced. Pecco Bagnaia or Jorge Martin, you have to have one of those two. But they're going to be horrendously priced, and you are going to be left with trying to, you'll be picking Michele Pirro just because you spent the rest of your money on the rest of them. So yeah, it's going to be a tricky one this time. I think there's going to be some value in there, but it will be trying to find it.
Well, listen, Dave, safe trip home. Good to speak to you guys. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back next week, and keep an eye on Patreon for some special interviews coming up.